Well, we got a big chunk of scripture today, and I was hoping that I could set up a second microphone here so that you could share the reading of this scripture with me. But I think we're close enough together that anyone who I ask to read, if I have any volunteers to read, any volunteers who would like to read for me? Margaret would love to read. Why don't we take it, do I have a second volunteer? Okay, you'll read for us. Good. Your loud, super loud voice. And
within the days?
Yeah, and I think what we'll do is, stand up, and we'll go, the three of us will alternate. You'll go, and then we'll each do a paragraph in turn. Make it a little less boring than my voice.
Paragraph. Oh.
So this is, just to give you a tiny bit of background, this literature that we're going to read today from the first two chapters of the book of Ruth, you're familiar with the story of Ruth. It came from a period called the period of the Judges. Israel was not really a nation, in a sense. It was really a confederacy of tribes. This period is called the period of the tribal confederacy by historians. And there were some of the beginnings of what we would call the identity of a nation, but not many. And Israel was, you hear people say Israel was ruled by judges. That's a little bit of a sort of an overstatement. What would happen is if there was an enemy that was attacking one or more of the tribes, the other tribes would rally to help support, and they would do that under the aegis of a single commander. But once the crisis was over, that person wouldn't have any authority. So there wouldn't be any ongoing, royal or centralized leadership in the nation. It was very decentralized. It was a tribal situation. So Margaret, you're going to read for us. And the time period is about 1150 to just around 1000.
In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she started to return.
Okay, and I think we'll go paragraph by paragraph. So you go, but get ready to go again, because we'll have another paragraph.
Okay.
You ready? There we go. That's okay. She's going to read again in a minute. Yeah.
Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that you may find security, each of you, in the house of your husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters. Far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth calmed her. So she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But
And
she
then-
said, do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you. When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her.
And then there's a new paragraph, so I'll jump in here. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred up because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? And she said to them, call me no longer Naomi. Naomi, by the way, means pleasant. Call me Mara, that means bitter. For the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So Naomi returned together with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with her from the country of Moab. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. And then Margaret.
Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, behind someone in whose sight I may find favor. She said to her, go, my daughter. So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. They answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his servant, who was in charge of the reapers, to whom does this young woman belong? The servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. So she came, and she has been on her feet from early this morning until now, without resting even for a moment. Then Boaz said to Ruth, now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is before you and follow behind them. I have ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. Then she fell prostrate with her face to the ground and said to him, why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge.
Okay, and then do you want to jump up and do a little more, Ruth, for us?
Then she said, may I continue to find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants. At mealtime Boaz said to her, come here and eat some of this bread, and dip your morsel in sour wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he heaped up for her some parched grain. She ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she got up to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, let her glean even among the standing sheaves, and do not reproach her. You must also pull out some handfuls for her from the bundles, and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about ephah of barley. She picked it up and came into the town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gleaned. Then she took out and gave her what was left over after she herself
Hey, guy. Hey. Hey. It's a little loud in the sanctuary. We got a meeting. We have a meeting in the sanctuary. Yeah. Yeah, not around this area. Yeah. That's all right.
Father Lord, his kindness has not forsaken the living of the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a relative of ours, one of our nearest kin. Then Ruth the Moabite said, he even said to me, stay close by my servants until they have finished all my harvest. Naomi said to Ruth, the daughter-in-law, it is better, my daughter, that you go out with his young women. Otherwise, you might be bothered in another season. So she stayed close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
Well done. That is quite a passage, isn't it? That's a long one. Thanks be to God for this, his word. Let's take a moment and pray. Heavenly Father, help this beautiful story that we have from Scripture to enlighten us and encourage us today. We thank you for the examples of Ruth and Naomi and the inspiration they've provided for many people for generations. Help us to have the ambition to be everyday heroes. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. This is one of those days. No sound system initially, no lights. Now we got the guys that are blowing outside. We have to overcome a few things today, but we're gonna make it work. I want to ask you to turn to someone near you. If you're sitting off on your own, you may have to move a little bit. Maybe you have to pair up with Sandra for a minute. And I want you to ask the question of one another, what is a hero? What are the characteristics of a hero? See if you can come up with an example of somebody who's a hero. Okay? So take a minute in groups of 2 or 3 and talk about that issue. What is a hero? There we go.
Well, I think it's somebody who sacrifices themselves for other people, for instance, a father who works really hard for his kids. No, it just has to be a
Someone who doesn't worry about consequences to oneself before doing a brave thing.
somebody jumps into a pond to save a dog. If you can't get out, that's a sacrifice of themselves. I heard about it. I didn't.
All right, let's get to be a large group again for a minute. And what are some of the ideas you had about a hero? How do you define a hero? I heard some wonderful things.
Somebody that's brave.
So bravery
I
and
was thinking
courage.
Somebody who sacrifices themselves for somebody else.
Yeah. That idea of sacrifice and bravery and courage are very core ideas. Anyone else want to add anything? Yeah.
Someone who's willing to step up when no one else does and do what needs to be done.
Yeah. So kind of in a moment of crisis, who will respond in that moment? Others.
Well, going along with that, someone maybe who does not worry about the consequences to themselves.
Yeah.
They do something brave. And if I could just share my example, we were talking.
Yeah, examples too. We'll come to that. So
Oh,
jump
wait,
right in.
don't
Jump
want
right
to
in.
share my example.
No, go definitely. Go ahead.
Being
Yeah.
Being in Arizona, the first person that came to my mind actually was John McCain, regardless of his views on different issues. He was in that Vietnamese POW, they called it the Hanoi Hilton, for 5 years, and stood up to those guards. He was beaten every single day that he was there, and this really impressed me. He could have been released early.
Yeah.
The Vietnamese wanted to make a trophy out of him.
Yeah.
And say, see, we're letting this American go. His father is an admiral, and his grandfather. And McCain said, no, I wasn't the first one in, so the people who've been here longer than I have, let them go before you let me go. And
Yeah.
that's certainly
Great
putting
example.
others ahead of oneself. So that was one person that came to mind. And I can think of other people in history and literature, but he's someone that we
Yeah, that we know.
I think right now with the COVID situation, that the people that are dealing with this daily in the hospitals and the nurses that are exhausted but won't quit, they're heroes to me.
You know, it's interesting. We have, many of you know Lamont Yoder in the church, and he's responsible for 4 of the hospitals in the Banner system. And so he's kind of second in command in that system. He told me that their yearly turnover rate right now for nurses is 40%. So
How much percent?
40. They're losing 40% of their staff each year. They have to replace. So the 60 who stay, really, I mean, it is heroic to stay. I mean, they're perpetually understaffed and to keep the quality of care. Yeah, very good. Other examples anyone wanted to mention that they came up with in their group? Yeah, Sandra.
We were talking about a hero could be is just anyone that's willing to stay in their own lane. Because we believe that, right? I can say, we believe that Christ has made us all heroes. And when you stay in your own lane and you look at what God has given you to work with, that is a hero. Because you're choosing not to be like anyone else but Christ. So for us, we thought that was a hero.
Yeah, that's a deep thought. This story of Ruth is a story about heroism. And it does stretch our understanding of heroism. I think we sort of culturally, I think there is some cultural confusion around this today. We tend to make athletes and actors heroes, particularly if they're willing to, frankly, just agree with the general social position on, let's say, social justice. They're using their platform, and that's seen as being heroic. I find that an odd definition of heroism. When these are $1 million, they're earning many of them hundreds of millions of dollars in their lives. They're sort of the top of the economic system. They pay no cost for what they're saying. In fact, they get adulation. So we do have some confusion around this, but I think that the sort of baseline understanding has to do generally with these great acts of sacrifice, these responses in the moment where there's tremendous courage. And we often think of situations of wartime, like you mentioned. Or I remember once when I was back out east, there was a firefighter who was going home after a double shift. And the car in front of him was occupied by a young man who was at the end of his rope. He was despairing. And this guy stopped on the Verrazano Bridge and jumped off the bridge. And the firefighter stopped his car behind that car, handed his wallet and keys to a stranger, and jumped off the bridge down into the, that's quite a jump on that bridge, and saved the guy's life. That's what we tend to think of with heroism, and there's certainly that is a part of it. But as a pastor friend of mine used to say, it's as if God gives us $100 worth of love. And some of us get to spend it all at once. We're given that moment where we get to do something dramatic and take this huge risk. But on the other hand, Jesus says you can do no greater thing. In other words, that's a definition of heroism. And here it comes, than to lay down your life for someone else, than to spend your life for someone else. And that might happen in one moment. You might spend all $100 in one risk, but it also might happen 5 and 10 cents at a time. And so I'm coming into Sandra's point over here, that is that there are ordinary heroes and heroines. There are people who don't get just one moment of high adrenaline and then it's over. They have to do the thing that they're going to do day after day after day. And maybe that's the people you're talking about in the hospital. They're caring for people. Maybe it's a researcher who has to spend all their time and energy trying to discover that cure. Their whole life is about that one task, day after day after day. Maybe it's an advocate. I had someone in a previous congregation who graduated #1 from Columbia Law School. And when you graduate #1 from Columbia Law School, a lot of doors open to you. You could work for almost any agency in the government. You could be the pick of any law firm. He also scored the highest in the state in the law boards. He was a brilliant man. And he went to work in a poverty law center. So he was earning the lowest wage you could as a lawyer and spending all of his time representing people who had no money to pay him. But man, what an impact he had. And it went beyond just helping the people that he helped. It was like the example of his life, the simplicity of it and so on. I think also of people in the context of family who have hard responsibilities. The parents who have a special needs child that they care for, who's going to be not, 18 or 20 years and out into the world, but is going to be your whole life caring for someone. My sort of version of Travis in my previous church was a fellow called Michael Barozzi, and if we had our system up today and our magic man at the back, I was going to play you some of his music. He's a brilliant musician, a pianist and a songwriter, and he had both a special needs child and also terrifically bad arthritis, super painful arthritis. So for him, his gift was that God had given him was to play the piano, and every note hurt, right? And so every time he practiced and every time he played, and yet you would never know it. No one in the congregation even knew that he had that problem. That to me was a kind of heroism, to use his gift in the way he did without ever complaining about it. I think of the children who have to take care of their parents. There are all kinds of opportunities we have to have this virtue of heroism. So it's a study on heroism, Ruth, and it takes place against the background of a famine. Famine is a big motivating force in this story. And so it raises for us this question of what is the Bible's perspective on hunger? And if someone were to ask you that question, what is the Bible's perspective on hunger? What would you say? Well, I think of the fact that initially in the garden, there was no hunger issue, right, for Adam and Eve. There was lots of food, and it was just there to be enjoyed. And then, of course, after the fall, the situation changes, and God warns Adam and Eve that you're now going to have to earn your bread by the sweat of your brow. There's going to be some work involved with survival, with being able to feed yourself. And indeed, we see that often in Scripture there are situations where individual families or whole nations are having trouble feeding themselves, and that raises this question of what are the causes of famine and hunger. When you think about what are the causes of hunger, what are some of the causes? You can shout it out if you've got a cause of hunger.
Poverty.
Yeah, general economic poverty. People can't afford to buy food. Yeah. Lack of rain. Sub-Saharan Africa is an area that doesn't have steady rain. The whole area, that's one of the reasons that part of Africa is the poorest area in the world. Also doesn't have very good soil. So it's a combination of those two things. Other causes of hunger.
People not having food stamps.
Yeah, there's no broader system to support. Now, actually, this in Ruth's story, you notice this word gleaning that comes up. Remember, I mentioned to you, there's no real government in Judges of any kind. There's just a response in a war-type situation, but there's no ongoing administrative, function of any kind. There's no police, there's no hospitals, there's nothing that we would associate with governmental order. But there are social practices that try to make up for that. And so you have this institution of gleaning, which is an instruction in Israelite territory that you don't take everything out of your field if you're a farmer. As you're picking sheaves, some are going to drop to the ground, and you must leave them on the ground. You must leave actually portions of your field available for those that otherwise wouldn't be able to eat. So this is trying to create a collective consciousness and awareness of poverty and the poor. And we see this with Jesus, that he engages in a food ministry. He feeds people. It's not all that he does, and he most famously says, men and women don't live by bread alone, quoting Deuteronomy 8:3. But you notice he doesn't say men and women can live without bread, right? There's an obligation, there's a kind of obligation to care for those who are hungry that Jesus embodies in his life as well. So there's yeah, go ahead.
Gleaming, can you just, I still don't understand.
Gleaning is to go along in the field and pick up what's fallen on the ground.
So you just follow after everything's been done?
Yeah, you got a crew that are working, and what they're doing is they are picking by hand, and you're just picking up the scraps. The author of our chapter compared it to garbage picking, picking the garbage from the garbage cans. The dumpster picking, that might be a little, it's not quite the same thing, but it's picking up what's left over. Now you notice in the story that we heard, at one point Boaz is going to provide protection for Ruth. And one of the things he says is not only that nobody should mess with her when she's gleaning, but that she should also be able to pick from the parts that haven't fallen on the ground. She's in effect able to join the regular pickers that are working for him.
One example of that I've done is occasionally Christmas tree lots will allow people to go in and pick up any of the clippings or trimmings. You might not want to buy a whole tree, and most of them are pretty nice about it. If you want to take a few, clippings of the furs and things, they'll let you do it.
Yeah.
You can pay them a little bit, but that's kind of gleaning. It's
That is.
left over.
That's an example, definitely. When we're in our work in Africa, you get to come up close and see what are some of the other reasons for hunger. Some of them are a lack of technology or technique. In much of Malawi, for instance, the only implement they have for farming is a hoe. They have one tool. Imagine trying to do farming with one tool, let alone you don't have any power equipment, you don't have any tools. So that is a thing that you see: lack of technology and lack of resources to get those. You've got all the other social problems that connect with poverty, like war and conflict, that create these things. You also have inefficiencies like disorganization, lack of planning, and so there are some of the answers. Naomi is quick to blame God for all the misfortunes, but some of the things that happened to us, we were responsible for ourselves. And this is demonstrated in the Bible with Joseph, who encounters poverty and famine on a grand scale in Egypt. It's an area where they don't get a lot of rain, but where they have a river that is much bigger than our canals called the Nile. And it seasonally floods, and it spreads out, and it creates an area where you can have agriculture and crops. This is why it's called the Fertile Crescent. You've heard that term, and that's to do with the Nile. Well, if that fails to happen or doesn't happen to a significant degree, you're gonna have famine. And this was a pattern in the life of Egypt. But you remember what Joseph does? He creates surplus. Remember how he did it? How did he do it? You remember? You remember the dream that he had, that he then implements? He becomes the vizier, or the kind of right-hand person in Egypt. And what he does is he invests in barns and storage areas. And he develops a strategy where when the crops are good and the Nile is flooding well and they're getting a lot of food, he's saving certain percentages of it every year so that when the famine comes, he's got a supply. He's created a surplus. And so that becomes a basic economic principle that the Bible offers us as a way of dealing with potential disasters and problems. It creates surplus. A lot of good things can come out of surplus properly used. So these are some of the perspectives the Bible has on it, and the impacts are very dramatic with famine. Because, when you think about how your life is organized, if you can't feed yourself, nothing else is really possible. All the other things you could do with your time and energy are now caught up just trying to survive. And so you have malnutrition, vulnerability, illness, death, and you have migration. And that's what's happening in our story today. So let's jump into that. The cause of the movement of this family of Naomi and her husband is a famine that's taking place in Bethlehem. And there's a certain irony in that, because Bethlehem means house of bread. That's what that translates from in Hebrew. So, and this play on words will become important. So Naomi says, you remember in her complaint later, she says, I was full, and now I return empty. Remember when she returns to Bethlehem? Well, it's an interesting thing she says, because she was actually empty when it came to food. That's why she left. But she was full in terms of relationships. She had a husband, she had 2 children. There was a richness to her life. And so together as a family, they felt they were still rich, even though they were dealing with poverty and malnutrition. They could handle that as a family. They could move to a different area, and they decided to go to Moab. And so that was the first migration. And then we read what happened to the family. The father dies. The sons marry Moabites. They have about 10 years of marriage each. So you figure they're marrying probably, 15, 16 years old. They're kind of in their mid-20s. So these boys die early. It's interesting. We look at these sort of ages, mortality tables, and we see that in our age, that's actually lessened a little bit in the United States. You know that in the last couple of years, because of the pandemic and some other issues, our mortality rate has gone down instead of up, first time in a long time. But in general, we think of a life lasting a certain length of time, maybe 4 generations, maybe 80 years or 85 years. And you look at these rates in the ancient world and you think, the average rate was only, 30. How is that possible? Well, a lot of people died in childbirth or before age 2 or 3. They didn't make it out of that first, preschool age. But actually, if you made it out of that, you tended to live into your 50s and 60s. So to die in your 20s was unusual. These 2 young men die, and now these 3 women are left on their own. And so the story picks up, and Naomi makes this decision to leave the foreign country where she's in, Moab, and to head back to her family, her roots, her other relatives in Bethlehem. And the 2 sister-in-laws decide to go along with her. Orpah is an interesting figure. She's sometimes contrasted with Naomi, as if you've got, faithful Naomi and sort of unfaithful Orpah. But Orpah actually is willing also to leave the land of her country and to go with her mother-in-law. And part of the drama of this story is Naomi trying to convince these 2 women that their future lies not with her, but in Moab with their own families, that their security is there. And so there's this dramatic moment that we heard read for us a little bit earlier of Naomi's plea. And what is Naomi's case? She tries to convince these girls that they need to stay in Moab. What does she say? Do you remember from the scripture? What's her case that she gives to them? Yeah, one is, remember Levirate marriage? We've talked about that in here earlier in the year. If Naomi had had 5 kids and the boys were growing up, they would have had this Hebrew obligation to marry these women. They could start over again. But since she only had 2 and they're gone, they're not going to wait a generation. They'll at that point be, 50 and the boys would be 20. And so it's unlikely, they'd be out of their childbearing range. So it's an impossibility that they could have the experience of motherhood and family and the security that comes with that being your basic economic unit. So that's right. What else does she say? I'm not going to be able to help you in this. And she also gives the counsel of despair. She says, in effect, I care about you. I don't want your lives to be over. My life, in a sense, is over. So she's got a survival strategy, but not a strategy to flourish, right? These are the two. We can't flourish unless we survive, so we need food to survive. She needs to go back home. She needs to. There's the famine that has now come upon Moab isn't as bad back in Bethlehem. So she wants to go back to get some food and sustenance with her family, but she doesn't believe she will ever again be able to flourish. And she wants these 2 young women to flourish and have not just survival, but an opportunity for family. So she's got an interesting set of values. There's still malnutrition in Moab, but you have a chance for a life, basically, is what she's saying. And in a tearful goodbye, Orpah says yes, and of course Ruth famously says no on this front. And we have this incredible passage that comes up with this amazing poetry, this amazing vow. Yes.
In verse 15,
Mm-hmm.
it says, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods." What gods did the Moabites have?
The god in Moab was called Shemesh. So you can see in the patriarchal period of time and coming right up sort of over the next 500, 600, 700 years, Israel did not we're used to the idea of monotheism. One great God that governs the entire universe. But that's a revolutionary idea in the story of religion. Most gods in the ancient world were local deities. And so, and they were connected with local areas and local mountains and local rivers and so on. And so there was a kind of a parochialism about religious belief at the time. And so if you left many people believed if you left one territory, you left, as it were, the orbit of that god. You moved outside of the area where that god had influence. And this is one of the things that makes it very dramatic when, like, Israel enters the promised land, because now they're in the territory of the Canaanite gods. And if they're defeated in battle, it feels like their God has been defeated. Do you remember the great scene when the ark is taken? It feels like, oh my gosh, the presence of God. That element goes on for a long time, and it really wasn't till the exile where Israel was pulled away from their land into Babylon, and yet discovered that God was present in Babylon. That the prophets were still active, that it was possible to worship God and not be in your own land, that they began to get this bigger picture of who God is. Is that helpful? So we have this incredible statement from Ruth, and it's really the heart of the whole narrative. Ruth decides that she is going to make this. Now this is where she begins to show her heroism, because her prospects for flourishing are better in Moab than they are in Bethlehem and to move back into this other territory. But she expresses this in this incredible poetry. And if we just take a look at verses 16 and 17 for a minute in chapter 1. Don't press me to leave you or turn back. Where you go, I will go. So I want you to think about your relationships for a minute. If we were to make an index of how deep our relationships are, there's some relationships where we're on a journey with someone for a while, right? They're a roommate at college. They're a friend at work for a while. We teach in the same school. We're brought together for a part of the same journey in life, right? And that's a valuable thing. It's not to be sneezed at. And so that's part of what Ruth is promising. Where you go, I'll go. I'm on this journey with you. Then she says, where you lodge, I will lodge. I'm not just going to share this journey, but I'm going to share your life. So when the journey stops, I will also be there with you. I'm going to remain with you. That's a deeper type of relationship, right? We're going to do life together. I'm committed not just to this moment in time, but I'm committed to you for this friendship indefinitely in time. And then your people shall be my people. This is an interesting one. We can be committed to someone, right, and sharing life with them, but there's another level of depth where our identity is bonded with their identity. We understand who we are in relationship to that person. And so when Ruth is saying, your people will be my people, she's saying, I'm going to understand who I am in relationship to you. I'm not going to just be an independent self floating out in the world, but I'm going to bind my identity to you. I'm going to understand who I am in relationship to you. That's another level of depth, isn't it, in relationship? And then finally, your God will be my God. So we're going to also share faith. And as we know in relationships, there's something incredible about sharing your faith with someone. It changes the nature of a friendship. Now, you look at your friendships, there's different kinds of depth. There's some people you're doing life with you don't share faith with because it's no guarantee that everyone, let's say, in your family is going to share your faith. There's people that you feel that identity thing with, you don't necessarily share faith with. There's some people you're not, doing life all the time with them, but you share your faith. So it's almost like these are 4 different kinds of measures of depth of relationship. And of course, when you got all 4 going, you've got really something amazing, and in your life, and that's what the Bible encourages us to have. So this is an incredible show of loyalty, and then the last part is powerful. We have this word that occurs in the narrative as you read back through, kindness, right? You keep saying, this occurs in many settings. Naomi says to the daughter-in-laws, you've treated me kindly. You've treated our family kindly. Even to my sons in death, you treated them kindly. That isn't a good translation, frankly. That's one of the ways they didn't really pick the right word there. Sometimes there's no good English word. And that's why I put on the title of this Hesed. So Hesed is covenant loyalty. It is this determined commitment that you can have to someone. The best really word in English is unconditional love. And so, this is the behavior that Ruth has displayed in her relationships, and Naomi is recognizing it. And it becomes the big theme of the story, because she says, not only am I going to do my journey with you, not only am I going to do my life with you, not only am I going to see myself in terms of my relationship with you, my identity, not only am I going to share faith with you, but I'm going to be buried in your grave. This is a death thing. I'm going to go right to the end. This is unconditional. There can't be anything that happens in the future that would ever break this bond, no matter what. And so that's where this idea of unconditional commitment comes from. And we contrast human love, which is variable, dependent on our emotions and how we're feeling and what's going on and how successful, with God's love, which is this Hesed love. So the main word for God's love in the Old Testament is Hesed. When you see that word, when you see the words loyalty in the Psalms or covenant, that's the word Hesed that's coming in there.
Is that a Greek word?
It's a Hebrew word. Yeah, so that's a transliteration. I'm giving you an English version of a Hebrew word there. Yeah, so that Ruth is, and the Bible is telling us by using that language that Ruth is a heroic representative of God's unconditional love. She is demonstrating the character of God in history. She is making commitments in the same way that God makes commitments to us. Ruth is making commitment to her mother-in-law. And then they return to Bethlehem, and this is this wonderful scene. And there's different ways to look at Naomi. And Naomi is willing to do self-sacrifice. She's willing to go home and let her daughter-in-laws have their own lives, right? There's a self-sacrificial, heroic element to that. And there's also a little bit of, what would we call it? There's also a little bit of sort of bitter, martyrdom. That's better than the word I was going to use. She is a little bit playing the martyr, where people are excited to see her, and they recognize her. It's quite remarkable. This has been a long time now, right? It's been, almost a generation, but certainly 15 years, and people are welcoming her back, and she's like, oh, don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, because my life is bitter. God has done terrible things to me. You know what I mean? This is this tendency that we have to bring out the worst thing of our heart, you know what I mean, and repeat it. And she's identifying, she's giving her narrative of despair to everyone in the town. Now there's a certain emotional honestness about that. This is how she's actually feeling. But of course she is rehearsing it and identifying herself. She actually renames herself bitterness. Wow. So she is adopting a new identity. She goes from Naomi, which means pleasant, to Mara, which means bitter. So very interesting. She has given up the faith part. So now she's hoping to survive at home, but not to flourish, right? And I wonder, this is just me, but I wonder if she has become a little culturally captive to the idea that you can only flourish if you've got a husband and children who have children and a whole set of, generations rising up. It's a wonderful thing to have that. I must say, coming from a small family, I'm a little jealous of people in our congregation that have 5 kids and then 20 grandkids, and I think it's so wonderful. Hard to cook for them at holidays, but other than that, it's fantastic to see that moving out in the world. I love that. But is it the only way to flourish relationally? No. And you can flourish as a single person. There's lots of ways to flourish. So it's interesting. She's kind of giving up, but Ruth is not giving up. It's interesting. And so we come to this part of the story with Ruth's character. And I love the way Naomi explains how she's feeling with this play on full and empty. Did you catch it? She says to people, I went away full, even though my purse was empty and we had no food and I was desperate. I was full because I had these relationships. Now I come back empty, even though she's coming back to an area where she's going to be full. She's going to have food. And so, interesting. It's an interesting little play. But Ruth comes into play, and she shows her character. And it's the things you mentioned earlier of a hero. Courage. She's going to live without male protection. She's going to go public as a foreigner. She's going to let everyone know I'm a foreigner, but I'm ready to work, and I will do what the poor do in every situation where they want to survive. I'm going to get into the field, and I'm going to work, and I'm going to glean, and I'm going to take responsibility for Naomi. She's going to be the one that provides for Naomi. She's going to feed Naomi. Very, very courageous thing to do. And as we can see, she also is someone who can work hard. So much so that the foreman, after one day, recognizes that basically she's out working the other workers. He's impressed. And when Boaz comes to his field to review what's going on for the day, he owns the field. He notices there's a new worker, and he asks the foreman, and the foreman says, man, she's amazing. That woman hasn't rested for a second all day long. She's been standing upright and working behind and gleaning everything she can get. And so then in this encounter between Ruth and Boaz, which will play out next time because they've divided this story into two parts, we see the initial meeting there, and Ruth is also very humble. It's interesting. For a very strong woman who could take very courageous decisions, she's very humble and very grateful for this provision that she's been given. She's not demanding the food as a right. She's thankful to Boaz for letting her do this. And he has heard about her courage, her extraordinary Hesed, and he mentions it. You are a person of Hesed. And so he begins to extend his protection to her. And first it's protection from lest any man mess around with her, but it's also protection to glean. He gives her lunch. He connects her with his workers. He kind of makes her part of his little company there on the farm. One of the things about trouble and difficulty from the character standpoint is that it's an opportunity to grow who we are. We don't grow as much as people when life is easy, but when life is difficult, we have to make a response. We have to make a choice of how we're going to handle it. And Ruth makes the courageous, heroic choice that she's going to not only handle her own situation, but she's going to be responsible for another human being. She's going to make a great sacrifice. And in doing so, she ennobles herself. It's very interesting. The problem that she's in, the difficulty that she faces, the tragedy that she has to deal with, becomes an occasion for her greatness. So much so that the men of the story recognize it. You're embodying who God is what Boaz says to her. You are a woman of Hesed. I am so impressed. It's very interesting. So this is one of the things to remember about difficulty, that God can use that as a process of ennobling our characters. There's a form of fullness that has to do with who you are. There's a fullness that no one can take away from you. And that has to do with your character. And that's a real thing in life. In other words, you can be secure but empty in terms of your character. You can be in poverty but have a character that shines. And that's Ruth's situation. Both her courage and also her faith. Because she's, as we learn in the story, she's expectant that God can do great things for her. Now, it's interesting. Did you notice when we get back to the end of chapter 2 how Naomi responds? Because when Ruth tells, Naomi instinctively knows that woman could not have just gleaned as much as she brought back in one day. That's like a week's worth of food. How did this happen? And she explains, well, I had this encounter with this guy called Boaz. And at that moment, Ruth begins to shift, or Naomi begins to shift. She begins to think again that God might be at work in her life. The whole tone of what she's saying changes. She goes, really? Boaz? This is great news. Oh, he's a relative, and he's a great man. He's a person of Hesed. And so, in effect, God begins to show up in Naomi's life in a way that she's not expecting. All right, questions or comments on any of this stuff today, these first two chapters? Thank you all. Yeah, Margaret.
What should we take away from this? This is a pretty dramatic situation that Ruth and Naomi find themselves in. But can you think of sort of ways that we
takeaway?
can apply this in our own?
Well, if we circle back to the idea of heroism, I think we need to expand our understanding of heroism to include what we might think of as ordinary heroes. Like Ruth is a hero that's, in a sense, completely under the radar. She would never get in the headlines, right? She would never get an award for philanthropy. She would, nobody would write a dramatic film about her life, because this is all very part of your ordinary life. She's taking responsibility for a member of her family. She's moving to a new territory. But as you get into the details of the story, you realize this takes tremendous courage. This takes great faith. And so it reminds us that in our ordinary lives, as we respond to difficulty and tragedy, as we take responsibility for others, as we form relationships of depth, we become ordinary heroes like Ruth. Is that? Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Emptiness can come to us in so many ways. It can be through an injury, or it can be through a divorce, where you're starting
Yep.
your life all over again.
And, sometimes we have a picture of what fullness is supposed to look like. It's supposed to look like a certain kind of family or a certain type of career. But another part of Ruth's lesson is that, she is one of the most heroic figures in the Old Testament, and she's in Jesus' line. And she didn't have any of those elements. So you can have this fullness of character and fullness of faith even in the midst of these harder situations. So it's powerful. Yeah.
Even in our study, it asks a question, how do we feel about immigrants being a part of the lineage of Jesus? And you didn't touch on it, and I wondered,
Yeah.
could you give that view, please?
Yes.
I know it's controversial,
No.
and so
Yeah.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No.
What was the question?
It was about immigrants in the story, the idea of immigrant in the story. And so, yes, the story emphasizes, you would think after we know in chapter 1 that Ruth is a Moabite, that we've identified that already, but they keep titling her Ruth the Moabite. And that's a reminder that she is a foreign economic migrant. She's someone who's been forced to, in some senses, to leave. They're going back for food. That's the motivation for, departing. And she, of course, has this other motivation to support her mother-in-law. So there, as we said earlier, there are many complex causes to hunger and poverty, and they cross borders, those causes, because the world is interconnected. One of the differences between then and now that makes this a little more complicated is this was not a world with borders. There were no borders, right? So people had a general sense, here was Egypt and here was Israel, but it wasn't like there was a line in the sand, so to speak, and a treaty and an offense and so on. I mean, it was a world where people were moving, and that's one of the reasons why hospitality is so valued in the ancient Near East. You have a moral obligation, even if it's your last piece of bread, to share it with someone who asks for your hospitality in the ancient Near East, because there was no social system to support anything and no organized way of protecting people. And so you had to do this all privately. And so you were under an obligation to give hospitality. That's part of the ethic. The Bible also has this category of the sojourner. And that's the one who is staying temporarily in your midst, who's been dislocated, who's, we would say, refugee status. And there's special care that should be given to them. It's interesting how, it's just complicated for us in a lot of ways. I don't know how far you want me to go into it. Go ahead. Did you want to?
Well, I'm a lot more simple-minded than the
Right.
theologian in you, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But I see it just the surface.
Mm-hmm.
That Jesus is our Savior, and we are all His people.
Yeah.
Whether we're foreigner or
Right.
homebodies. So I don't dissect it
Yeah.
because I'm not capable of that.
Oh, you don't sell yourself short. This is a smart room. What? Yes.
But that's kind of my view of it because I want it to be that way.
Yeah.
I do believe that, but I also believe in everyday miracles. A smile does it for me.
So, yeah, I mean, I think where Christians are some of the things we have to think about around this issue, and we'll do a forum on this eventually in this room. We'll get some different points of view. It would be a very interesting discussion to have and to live stream around this. I think it's a very important thing to do. But is that on the one hand, you're entirely right. We, from a kingdom perspective, we are kind of equally related to everyone. God created everybody, and Jesus died for everybody, and God loves everyone. So we have, that doesn't recognize borders, right? On the other hand, what borders are in a sense, they're like a bigger form of family in some respects, right? We recognize that we have special obligations to our family. So we're gonna try to get our kids educated first. It doesn't mean we're not going to contribute to a fund to educate someone else's children, right? And be generous. But we have a bundle that we're responsible for first, and identity, in effect, nations are pursuing different kinds of identities in the world. And what borders do is allow different kinds of social experiments to happen. And unfortunately, what we see in the world is some social experiments work a lot better than others. And so people in places where it isn't working, they have the expression failed states. They want to leave and go somewhere. And the world has recognized that in some ways by saying that if you're under threat, this is the Geneva Convention of 1951, 1952. If you're under threat, then everybody has the, sorry, get this thing to come on. Sorry. Then every nation that signed the Geneva Convention on refugees has a responsibility to do something humanitarian for people that have a reasonable fear of persecution in their home country. What gets one layer more difficult is when folks want to move from one country to another for economic advantage. And of course, a world without borders is also a very dangerous world, in a world where there's terrorism and where states like to control other states, and where there's, security, in a sense, to pick it back one level, the primary biblical role of government is to provide security. Bear the sword, right? And that's to prevent chaos and disorder. So the world is simply not in a position to be without borders, because think what's happened even with defunding the police in our country, which is a country of order. All of a sudden you've got chaos in many areas in the country, right? Well, imagine that internationally if there were no borders, in effect. So while that's a goal to be able to, right now the best way to achieve it is through countries that share and help in development and, help to create stability in other places and help to spread democracy and so on. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, don't you think borders create prejudice? I mean, Ruth knew that she was going to this new country and there's going to be prejudice against her. But because of her love of her mother-in-law, she went ahead and went.
But of course, there was no border. You see, the prejudice doesn't depend on the border. It depends, that's an identity issue. And because we have freedom, we're going to develop different identities. There's a real difference between the Moabite identity and the God that they worship and their view of the world and the Hebrew identity. So although all people are loved by God in the same way, it doesn't mean all people are going to have the same values, right? Some people are authoritarians and some people are Democrats and some people, And so, you see what I mean? Right? And I think that you're right in that one of the great kind of push points in the Old Testament is that it seems like God wants to establish a people that are going to display his character. And that means he doesn't want them to mix too much with people from other areas who have these different values, because otherwise they won't be able to display his character. And that can turn into a narrow nationalism where other people don't count. And so you get some voices in the Old Testament that can't wait for revenge. When Israel's having a tough time, they want to kill everybody else. They want Israel to be the top of the league table. And one of the great reversals in the New Testament is that God's work is dissociated from nationalism. Politics and theology separate. So Jesus gets in trouble because he extends God's mercy and care and invitation beyond the national borders of Israel. And in effect, he says Israel's vocation, he goes to the suffering servant songs in Isaiah for his own mission. And the Messiah doesn't come to help Israel conquer everyone else. He comes to suffer to take the suffering of not just Israel, but to suffer as a Jew for the world. And so it's through the suffering of Israel that the world will come to a new understanding of who God is.
Just what you were saying, Jan, about maybe borders creating prejudices. There's a really famous poem by Robert Frost called Mending Wall.
Yeah.
And he starts out by saying something there is that doesn't love a wall. And the man and his neighbor out in the country are talking about this. And in the end, the neighbor who's mending his wall says, "Good fences make good neighbors."
Yeah.
That's Frost, but there's
In effect,
something to that. I thought of that.
In effect, the kind of self-determination that you see going on with individuals and families where people are choosing different places to live and different values and different things to pursue is similar with nations. They have identities. And some of the identities don't match. Ukraine wants to pursue, just to use a current example, they want to join Europe and pursue a more democratic form of life. Vladimir Putin is an authoritarian thug who wants to control every nation that he can control. You know, he's an out-and-out nationalist who uses everything for the purposes of extending Russian power. That doesn't mix. You know, you need a border there. Yeah.
For me, how often God shows himself in paradox. And the fact that Ruth is a foreigner, and yet she's the person who's exemplifying God's love.
Yes.
To me, is another example of it.
It's a tremendous thing. And so some of the most interesting encounters we have are with the stranger. You know, the person who is different than we are. You know, they have a different angle of vision, different cultural experience, different language. Those are moments where we're kind of stretched in those encounters. And the Bible loves those encounters. And that, you're right, that's what's going on in the story. There's a culture clash. And yet the highest value of Hebrew religion is represented by this foreign woman. Yeah, amazing. Thank you, guys. Let's pray, and Heavenly Father, we thank you for this amazing story and the depth of it and the challenge it is. And we pray in our time that we will be able to respond in ways that represent that Hesed love, both in ordinary ways within our work and within our families, and also in international ways as we face some of the large problems that have been raised this morning. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.